Alright guys, I thought I'd just take a few minutes and create this video to review what we talked about with regards to your immune system. So recall that over the last couple times we met, we talked a little bit about innate immunity as a review from the video you watched, and during innate immunity, we talked about four different ways in which innate immunity protects you against any pathogen or anything your body sees as foreign. So that includes our external barriers, so our skin, our mucous membranes lining the openings to our body. We talked about free-roaming white blood cells, and that includes macrophages, those amoeba-like cells that move around your system, engulfing anything they see as foreign. We mentioned neutrophils, which send out a toxin to destroy any sort of pathogen that may be in your body, in addition to a number of other white blood cells. We also talked about how fever and elevated body temperature can destroy pathogenic microbes, as those microbes are often, they've evolved to tolerate your own body temperature. And then we talked a little bit about inflammation and how your mast cells will release a histamine upon some sort of impact or injury that you might that might occur, and so those mast cells will cause your blood vessels to dilate and become leaky. And what will happen is those non-specific white blood cells will rush to the site of infection and hopefully try and take care of any pathogens that may enter your system. Now, if a pathogen does get into your system and starts reproducing, what will eventually happen is your adaptive immune system will start to kick in. And so with adaptive immunity, there are really two strategies that we discussed, and how your immune system develops this acquired response to a very specific pathogen. So one strain, for example, of the flu virus. And so what will happen with adaptive immunity is that here we see a bacterium. So let's say this is strep throat. This is the example I used in class. We have a bacterium, and all cells have these antigens. Most cells have these antigens on them that are essentially name tags, we said. So these antigens are proteins that mark cells either as belonging or foreign to your body. It really tells other cells in your system what that cell is and what it does. And so what we talked about on Tuesday specifically was that with this adaptive immune response, it's really these antigens that your immune system reads, and that's what stimulates the response to develop this B cell and T cell army. And so what we see happen, what we discussed, was that this whole process really kind of starts off with a macrophage up here at the top. And what we'll see is that the macrophage, after it engulfs one of those pathogens, so here's my bacterium inside this macrophage, the macrophage will really tear that pathogen apart and put antigens on the surface of the cell. So you can see these antigens being displayed here on the cell surface. This kicks off both what we call the humoral response of your immune system, so over here this side, as well as the cellular response of your immune system. And this was what I was getting at on Tuesday when I kind of tracked that A line and that B line as we kind of plotted out how each of these responses occur. Now don't forget what the target is for each of these two strategies. In the cellular response, and I had to remember this as cellular response targets cells, we're going to see that cytotoxic T cells are going to be produced. That's what's being shown here. And those cytotoxic T cells are what targets our infected body cells. So if we're thinking about, this bacterium over here, maybe it's strep throat is what's caused by this bacterium. What will happen in the cellular response is that these cytotoxic T cells will target our throat cells that have been infected and get them out of the system. With the humoral or immune response, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as that, what will happen is we'll see the development of B cells, which immediately change into plasma cells. And it's the plasma cells that contain these Y-shaped proteins displayed here, which are antibodies. And so these antibodies target any of the free-roaming antigens that may be in your system, or any pathogens with those specific antigens on them. So what we saw in our diagram that you guys took a look at before we even discussed the details of this process, and I did that so that you had kind of an introduction before we got into the details, is that you see at the very beginning here, the very first thing that happens is this macrophage engulfs the pathogenic microbes. So here what we're seeing in this first step is that macrophage engulfing the pathogen, engulfing the bacterium, and dismantling it. So displaying the antigens on its surface. So that's what's happening here in step 1, okay? Step 2 of this process, and you guys have this when you take down each of these descriptors, is that the macrophage travels to the lymph node. The next step in this process is that macrophage here comes into contact with a helper T cell. Now, in my view, the helper T cell is the most important cell in your system. It's what actually begins this immune system response. So without the helper T cell, none of the rest of this is going to occur. So it's critical that your immune system is healthy, is functioning, and that you have those helper T cells in play. They'll coordinate the building, really, of the T cell and B cell army. Now, what we see occur, and I said there's a lot of chemical signals that are going on in this whole process, is that when this binding takes place between the macrophage and the helper T cell, what we'll see is that memory cells will start to be produced at this point. We'll talk a little bit more about memory cells in a second, but also effector T cells are produced. So remember, I think when I was drawing this, I said that this connection stimulates for the production of more helper T cells. It's really effector helper T cells, and all effector means is a short-lived cell. So they're effector helper T cells. They immediately change or grow up into other types of cells. But what happens are these cells send out chemical signals to activate 2 separate responses. So in class, I think I labeled this as kind of the A set of responses over here and the B set of responses over here. And so as you're watching this, review your notes and you'll kind of be able to track each of these steps in the process. So on the one side, in this A response, what we see is the development of cytotoxic T cells. This is the building of that T cell army. So we crank out a bunch of these cytotoxic T cells, and when I hear toxic, I think chemical, right? So these cytotoxic T cells send out chemicals to destroy any of our body cells that have been infected by the bacterium. So immediately when a body has been infected, those bacteria start to reproduce by binary fission. So body cells are infected, macrophages are coming into contact with some of the bacteria, and so all this is occurring simultaneously. So again, the target over here with the cellular response are these cells, the body cells, and those are destroyed by the cytotoxic T cells. In addition, what I think is critical, and we'll pick up on this on Thursday, is that it's the memory T cells that are produced from this process that remain in your system and will always remember this specific antigen. So if you're infected with this very specific strain of bacteria again, these memory T cells will start cranking out cytotoxic T cells, and you won't experience symptoms from destruction of your body cells upon a second or third or subsequent infection by this specific antigen. On this other side of the diagram over here, this B cell track, really, what we see develop is that helper T cells, these effector T cells, will recognize that B cells are becoming infected by the pathogen. And we'll review this again here in a second, but these B cells, they immediately change or morph into plasma cells, okay? So here we see the illustration of a plasma cell, and a plasma cell is essentially a sack of antibodies. So one of these Y-shaped structures here, that's an antibody. Your body produces them. They will target the pathogen or any free-roaming antigens and mark them for destruction. Again, the last critical thing shown on this diagram are those memory B cells that will be produced. And with memory B cells, what they'll do is they'll immediately start cranking out plasma cells with antibodies to destroy pathogens very quickly in the future, so you never experience symptoms of the disease. Now, let me kind of go through this again, just as a review. We have that memory cell that was produced, right? And we see memory cells produced down here at the bottom of our diagram as well that I starred. And again, that's going to elicit a very quick response in the future. It's the effector T cell that's going to activate each of these responses. In the T cell response, in the building of that T cell army, we see this attack and killing of really the body cells, okay? So it's the pathogens that have infected body cells that are being destroyed in this process. And on the other side, during humoral or in the immune system response, what we see is the production of those B cells morphing into plasma cells almost immediately, and it's those cells that release the antibodies that target the pathogen. Now, the last thing that I want to leave you with is a link to a YouTube video. I thought it was a really nice, clear video that would maybe provide another way for you to review this process. And then please come and visit with us during office hours, or email us questions, give us a call if you have any concerns about this process. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if it was, and I'll continue to produce these in the future for you guys.